Okay, real quick, before anything else, pull up a chair, because this is one of those ones where I need you sitting down for it, not half watching this while you're scrolling something else. Because by the end of the next 13 minutes, you're going to understand something about your own gas bill that almost nobody on television is willing to say in plain English. So, let's get into it. There's an old habit in big families, the kind with 6 siblings and a grandmother, who runs the holidays like a small government. You'll notice that the loudest person at the table is rarely the one actually deciding anything. The decision already got made quietly, weeks earlier, in a phone call you weren't on. The loud person at the table is just there to make the decision feel inevitable by the time it's announced. I bring this up because that is almost exactly what happened on American television this past Sunday, and almost nobody watching it clocked what they were actually seeing. They thought they were watching a senator give his opinion. They were watching a decision get pre-announced. Here's the setup, and I'm going to give it to you the way it actually happened, not the way it's being repackaged for you. The United States and Iran signed a memorandum of understanding earlier this month. 60-day clock, full ceasefire, a path to reopening the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway that carries something like a quarter of the entire world's seaborne oil. Vice President Vance flew to Switzerland to run point on the technical talks. The administration's own framing in public has been cautious optimism, quiet diplomacy. The adults are handling it. That is the version most Americans have been handed, and on its face, it's not even false. It's just incomplete in a way that matters enormously for what happens to this country in the next 6 months. Because here is what was actually said out loud by a sitting United States senator on a Sunday morning broadcast to the entire country. Lindsey Graham told CBS he'd just spent 4.5 hours with President Trump. And then he laid out, plainly, what he believes comes next if the diplomatic track fails, which he also predicted it will. Quote, President Trump is going to take the Strait of Hormuz over by force. The United States will control the Strait of Hormuz. Unquote. Not might. Will. He went further, saying the U.S. would charge a fee to every vessel that passes through, to, in his words, pay for the operation. And if Iran contests that control, Graham's exact phrase was that the U.S. will, quote, obliterate them. That's not a hot take from a cable panelist. That's a member of the United States Senate who says he just left a 4.5-hour meeting with the sitting president, narrating what he believes the actual American policy will be. Sit with that for a second before we move on, because everything else in this video is downstream of that one clip. Now, here's the long short of it. The diplomatic option on the table right now is, by almost every account, the cheaper one for the United States. It is also, structurally, the one most likely to get blamed for everything that goes wrong afterward, because the moment anything in the Middle East flares up again, the deal becomes the scapegoat, not the decade of policy that preceded it. That's the setup. Now, let's talk about what taking the strait by force would actually mean for the country footing the bill, because the senator did not mention a single number, and the numbers are the entire story. Start with the water itself. The Strait of Hormuz is roughly 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Through it moves close to 20% of the entire world's oil supply, and almost all of Qatar's liquefied natural gas. According to the Congressional Research Service's own analysis, roughly 27% of global maritime oil trade transits that single channel. That's not a regional detail. That's a global pressure point, and the United States proposing to unilaterally run it. Graham's word, not mine, means putting American ships, American sailors, and American taxpayers directly between every other oil-importing country on Earth and the supply they depend on. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, all of them lose direct control over their own export route. China, India, Japan, South Korea, all relying on that corridor, all suddenly negotiating access through Washington instead of through open water. That is the diplomatic cost before a single shot is fired. Now, the military cost, because this is the part the Sunday shows skip entirely. Iran's coastline along the Gulf is the longest of any of the 8 bordering nations. Its exclusive economic zone there is nearly double the size of the next largest countries. That geography is exactly why, during the opening phase of this war back in late February, Iran was able to effectively shut the strait using cheap drones, small attack boats, and sea mines. Not a navy that could challenge the U.S. fleet directly, just enough asymmetric pressure to make insurance premiums spike and shipping companies pull out voluntarily. Taking the strait doesn't mean planting a flag on a sandbar. It means holding a 33-kilometer choke point indefinitely against an adversary with the longest coastline in the region, and a demonstrated willingness to use exactly the kind of weapons that are cheap to build and expensive to defend against. Anyone who tells you this is a weekend operation is selling you something. And here's the number that should actually worry you if you fill up a gas tank in this country. The Dallas Federal Reserve modeled what a full quarter of Hormuz closure does to oil prices, and found it could push West Texas crude toward $98 a barrel, while shaving close to 3 points off annualized global growth in that same quarter. That's the Fed's own number, not a partisan think tank. And remember, that's the cost of the strait simply being closed. A U.S. military seizure doesn't reopen the spigot on day one. It adds a new variable, an active American military occupation of the route, contested by a country that just spent a full-scale war demonstrating it can disrupt shipping with assets that cost a fraction of what defending against them costs. Brookings' own energy team has pointed out something the hawks conveniently leave out. The United States produces a lot of its own oil now, but oil is a globally traded, fungible commodity. American drivers don't get a discount because some of the barrels are domestic. If the global price spikes, the price at your pump spikes too, regardless of where your gas actually came from. Let's talk about who's saying go the loudest, because that tells you almost everything about why this option keeps resurfacing every time the diplomatic track wobbles. Graham has a documented history here worth knowing. He was, earlier this year, advocating for seizing Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal, before walking that specific idea back. He has been one of the most vocal critics of the $300 billion reconstruction fund, written into the current memorandum, at one point comparing it on social media to funding the Marshall Plan for, in his words, Germany with the Nazis still in charge. That's the rhetorical temperature we're working with. And the thing about that comparison, whatever you think of the deal's actual terms, is that it forecloses the possibility of any negotiated outcome ever being acceptable to the people making it. If giving money to a former adversary as part of a peace framework is automatically a betrayal, then the only acceptable outcome was always going to be military, regardless of what the negotiators in Switzerland actually achieved. Here's the quote then deconstruct moment, and it's a good one, because it tells you what the administration is actually committing to versus what it isn't. Asked directly whether the relative quiet on this issue signaled any shift, the White House press line, Seymour, from Caroline Leavitt, when this question came up around a related matter, was essentially that no position has formally changed, that silence isn't policy reversal, it's just silence. Apply that same logic here. The fact that the diplomatic track is publicly underway in Switzerland confirms exactly one thing: a deal is being attempted. It tells you nothing about what the contingency planning looks like if it fails, and Graham, by his own account, fresh out of a 4.5-hour sit-down with the president, is functionally telling you what that contingency planning is. The diplomacy is real. The plan B is also real. Those two facts are not in tension. That's actually how this administration tends to operate. Run the official channel in public. Let an ally run the unofficial channel in the same week, and see which one the public ends up more comfortable with by the time a decision has to be made. So, who actually pays if Plan B gets greenlit? Not abstractly, specifically inside the United States. 3 groups in order. First, American service members, because a we'll-run-it plan against a country with that coastline and that demonstrated asymmetric capability is not a peacekeeping deployment. It's an open-ended occupation of contested water, and occupations generate casualties on a timeline nobody puts in a Sunday show soundbite. Second, American taxpayers. Because Graham's own pitch includes charging tolls to pay for the operation, which is, if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, an admission that the operation itself is expected to be expensive enough to need its own dedicated revenue stream, raised from foreign shipping indefinitely, to fund an American military presence in someone else's strait. Third, and this is the one that actually lands in your driveway, American consumers through the oil channel because, and this is worth repeating slowly, the United States being a major producer does not insulate American drivers from a global price shock, and a contested military occupation of the world's single most important oil choke point is about as large a shock as the global market can generate, short of an actual full nuclear escalation. Now, the open question, because I'm not going to pretend this resolves neatly, because it doesn't. The diplomatic deal currently being worked in Switzerland might hold. It might not. If it collapses, the Lindsey Graham version of what comes next is not a fringe fantasy. It is, by his own account, a documented conversation that already happened inside the West Wing. The honest, uncomfortable position for anyone tracking this from inside the United States is this. The cheaper option, the one with the lower casualty count and the lower price at the pump number, is sitting on a table in Switzerland right now, and the loudest voices in Washington are actively rooting for it to fail, because the alternative is the one that lets them say, 20 years from now, that they were the ones who saw it coming, the ones who said, we should have gone further, the same way certain people still argue about battles that ended before most of us were born. History doesn't usually reward the side that said, I told you we should escalate. It rewards whoever had to clean up after the people who did. Whether America ends up paying that bill in dollars, in deployments, or in something it can't put a price on at all, that part hasn't been decided yet. It's just being narrated to you 4.5 hours at a time, before the vote ever happens. That's Fen for Borderlines. Analysis from the Edge.